Darian Cole was 39 years old, and for 4 of those years he had been building a life with a woman who had spent the last 4 months building a lie inside it. He drove a 10-year-old Silverado with 63,000 miles and a crack across the passenger side dash he kept meaning to fix. He wore steel-toed boots to work 5 days a week and came home with the kind of dust on his forearms that only honest labor produces. Her colleagues at the marketing firm called him Blue-Collar Darian, and Simone never corrected them. Not once. Not even when she knew what was sitting in his name at First Southern Trust. What he came home to on the first Tuesday in October was a house that smelled like something familiar and something wrong at the same time. Like the same air, but rearranged in a way only a man who builds structures and tests their integrity would notice. He didn't say anything. He set his keys on the hook he'd installed himself and walked to the hallway bathroom, the one Simone never used, and found the thing she had overlooked. It had been 4 months. That part came later. The test itself told him nothing about the timeline. The NA results told him everything. $48,000 of Darian's money had moved through an account Simone opened in her maiden name over the course of 14 months. And she had no idea the bank notified a secondary account holder on every transfer. She had no idea there was a secondary account holder. She had no idea what Darian had spent 6 years building quietly, while she spent his visible income and his patience in equal measure. What Simone never once thought to ask, in 4 years of marriage, in 4 months of a secret she believed was hers alone, was who had access to her medical records under the legal provision they had both signed at their first prenatal consultation. What happened next would cost Simone everything she thought was already settled. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning Darian found the test, the light had come through the kitchen windows the way it always did in October. Low and patient. The kind of light that doesn't rush. He stood at the counter with his coffee cradled in both hands and looked at the oak tree in the backyard. The one he'd planted from a 2-foot sapling the first spring they moved in. It was 3 times that height now. He had staked it, pruned it, fed it every season. He watched the wind move through it the way it moved through all his work, with a confidence that came from knowing the roots went deep. The kitchen itself was his. He had laid the tile floor on a long weekend 2 summers ago, mixing grout by hand while Simone was in Atlanta for a conference. He had measured and cut every piece himself, using a snap cutter he'd borrowed from his crew and a level he kept in the cab of his truck. The grout lines were perfect. The small things you could measure always told you the truth. His grandmother, Willa May, had told him once, sitting on the porch of her house in Spartanburg, "Don't trust what a thing looks like. Darian, trust what it holds up under." She had been talking about furniture. She had been talking about men. She had, he understood now, been talking about everything. He had met Simone at a project ribbon cutting in uptown Charlotte, one of those civic events where everyone pretended the free wine was the reason they came. She was in a red blazer and laughing at something her colleagues said, and when she turned and caught him watching, she didn't look away first. That was what he remembered. That she didn't look away. She had seemed, in those early years, like a woman who didn't back down from anything, and he had loved that about her, or what he believed that to mean. The marriage had been good for the first 2 years. Better than good in the early months, easy in the way things are easy before you know what they cost. She had an energy he admired, a social instinct he didn't share, a way of walking into rooms that he found genuinely impressive. He had trusted her without thinking about it. That was the part he kept returning to. Later, he had trusted her the way he trusted his own measurements, without verification. because he had built the relationship himself, and he believed he had built it sound. His other phone, sleeker and newer, stayed secured in the inside pocket of his work jacket, hanging by the door, unknown to her. It had been there for 2 years. She had never asked about it. Some people only saw what they looked for. Simone came downstairs at 7:45, already dressed, her phone face down in her hand. She kissed his cheek and said something about a meeting running long that evening. Her perfume was different again, a third new scent in 2 months, though she hadn't mentioned buying any of them. He noted it the way he noted everything, quietly, without comment, filing it in the structure he was always building in the back of his mind. It was the envelope on the counter that had started it, 3 weeks earlier. He had walked in from work to find a priority mail envelope already opened on the kitchen island, the kind that came from a private medical billing company, which was strange because Simone handled her own insurance and her own appointments, and always had. She'd moved it to the recycling bin before he could read it. He'd seen only the return address and a partial line through the windowed front. Patient account, Cole. He had filed it. He had waited. He was an engineer. Waiting was not weakness. Waiting was how you got the load-bearing number right. It was not a dramatic discovery. That was the part no one tells you. It was a Wednesday afternoon, a half day from the job site, because the concrete pour finished early, and it was the hallway bathroom that Simone never used, because she said the water pressure was inconsistent. He was reaching under the vanity for the backup plumbing snake. He'd been meaning to clear the drain for 2 months, when his hand found something that shouldn't have been there. It was in a small zippered makeup pouch behind the row of cleanser bottles pushed to the back wall. There were 2 tests inside, both positive. Both dated with a felt tip marker in handwriting he recognized as Simone's, a detail that told him she had been careful enough to label them, which meant she had been careful about a great many other things as well. His hands didn't shake. He stood in the bathroom for a moment, with the pouch resting in his palm, and did something that surprised even himself. He pulled out his phone and photographed both tests, the labels, the pouch, and the position under the vanity where he had found them. Then, he replaced everything exactly as it was. He washed his hands. He put the plumbing snake back in the truck. Then he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and navigated to the patient portal for Charlotte Regional Medical, where they had both established care since the move. He had legal access. They had set up each other as emergency contacts during the prenatal consultation Simone had booked 4 months earlier and canceled once, rescheduled, then canceled again, telling him she wanted to wait a little longer before they made anything official. The account showed 3 appointments he had not been told about. 1 in June, 1 in July, 1 in August. The gestational estimate from the August visit read 16 weeks. He sat with that number for a long time. The first positive test was dated June. She had known for 4 months and said nothing. She had slept in the same bed, eaten dinner at the same table, kissed his cheek every morning for 4 months and said nothing. He went further back. The bank portal he had not checked closely in 3 weeks showed a pattern he had not been watching carefully enough. 7 transfers over 14 months, each between $2,000 and $9,000, all moving into an account number he did not recognize. He cross-referenced the routing number. The account was registered to Simone Elaine Warren, her maiden name. $48,000 over 14 months, in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags and large enough to matter. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He forwarded everything, the screenshots, the portal records, the bank statements, to a secondary email address he had maintained since the early months of their marriage. Not out of suspicion then, out of habit. Because he was a man who documented what he built and everything he stood to lose. He opened his sleeker phone and sent a single text to one contact. It's time. Tuesday, at your office. He closed the laptop. He started dinner. He was calm in the way of a man who has already made every decision that matters. Patricia Odom's office was on the 14th floor of a building Darian had inspected 3 years ago during its construction phase, a fact that gave him a particular quiet satisfaction when he walked in. She was 61 years old, had practiced family and civil law for 34 years, and she did not flinch at a single thing he placed on her desk that Tuesday morning. She reviewed the bank records first, then the portal screenshots, then the photographs of the tests. She set her reading glasses on the desk and looked at him steadily. "You understand," she said, "that what you're describing is not just infidelity. There are potential fraud implications, given the asset transfers and the fact that she has not disclosed a pregnancy that may not involve you. I understand that. You're going to want a DNA test. I'm going to want several things." She nodded once. "Then let's build the case that gets you all of them." Real power, Darian had come to understand, operated in quiet rooms. 3 days later, he drove down to Spartanburg to sit with his Uncle Clarence, his grandmother's youngest son, the one who had worked 30 years in the county clerk's office and knew more about how paperwork moved than any lawyer Darian had ever hired. They sat on the same porch where Willa May had dispensed her wisdom, and Darian told him everything. Clarence listened without interrupting. When Darian finished, the older man looked out at the yard for a long moment. "She opened an account in her maiden name while you were married." "Yes, sir. And she never told you about the pregnancy." 4 months. Clarence was quiet again. "Then the woman was building herself a door," he said. "She just forgot you were the one who knew how doors worked." He handed Darian a folded piece of paper. On it was a name Darian already half recognized. Derek Holt, a commercial real estate agent who had sold Simone's firm 2 office spaces over the past 2 years, who had appeared in the background of 3 of her work event photographs on social media, always near enough to notice and far enough to deny. The paper showed a civil judgment against Derek from 2019, a former business partner's fraud claim, settled quietly for $62,000. Derek Holt was not a stranger to schemes. He was simply newer to this particular one. Back in Charlotte, Patricia's associate, a sharp 28-year-old named Keisha, who specialized in financial forensics, spent 4 days constructing the counter-profile. What she assembled was meticulous and devastating. Expense reports Simone had submitted to her own firm, using Darian's business address as a client reference. 7 instances of reimbursed travel that corresponded directly with Derek Holt's conference appearances across 3 different cities. And 1 signed vendor agreement bearing Darian's LLC name with a signature on it that he had never produced. That last discovery changed the nature of everything Darian was holding. This was no longer simply a dissolution. This was forgery. He ordered the DNA test through a certified paternity service. It required only a cheek swab collected from himself, mailed with supporting medical portal documentation. He paid for expedited results. That same weekend, he came home to find Simone in the kitchen making pasta, a performance she put on when she was trying to feel domestic. She told him about her week. He listened. He asked a question about her project timeline. She answered it, and she smiled. And he watched her the way a structural engineer watches a building he already knows is going to come down. Not with anger, not with grief, but with the specific, measured attention of a man who wants to make sure no one else is standing underneath it when it does. He was watching. The results came back on a Thursday. The probability of paternity was 0.0. The child Simone was carrying was not his. He had already known. But knowledge and documentation are different things, and Darian Cole had spent his entire adult life understanding precisely that difference. Patricia had suggested her conference room. Darian had agreed without hesitation. He called Simone and told her he had some paperwork regarding the joint property that required both of them, that Patricia had requested their presence for a brief review. He kept his voice warm, easy, entirely unremarkable. Simone asked if something was wrong. He said no. He said everything was exactly as it needed to be. What Simone walked into was a conference room with a long mahogany table, and sitting at that table were Patricia Odom, Keisha, Darian's Uncle Clarence, and, because Darian had felt it was right, Simone's own mother, Beverly, who had driven up from Rock Hill and who sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded and her face very still. Simone stopped inside the doorway. "Sit down, Simone," Darian said quietly. "This won't take long." He did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice once in 4 years of marriage, and he was not going to start now. Patricia opened the first folder. Bank statements. She placed them in front of Simone 1 page at a time, 14 months of transfers, each one time-stamped, each one traced to the maiden name account. Simone's expression moved from confident to careful to controlled, and none of those expressions reached her eyes honestly. Patricia opened the second folder, the vendor agreement bearing Darian's forged signature. Keisha explained, in clean, plain language, what the document was and what it represented under North Carolina law. Simone said, "I can explain in a moment," Patricia said. Not unkindly, just with the authority of someone who had heard that sentence 10,000 times and already knew everything that came after it. Darian opened the third folder himself. He placed the DINA results on the table in front of Simone without a word. He watched the confidence leave her face the way structural load leaves a compromised beam. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the quiet and irrevocable way of something that cannot be put back. "Darian," she said. Her voice had changed. "I was afraid to tell you. I didn't know how the money, Simone." He kept his voice level and even. "I need you to understand that I'm not here about the child. The child is not the issue in this room. The money and the forgery are the issue in this room." She tried again. She said his name with a softness he recognized from their first year together, from the early ease of the thing, and for a moment, the room was very quiet. Beverly, her mother, spoke from the far end of the table. "Simone. Stop. Just that. 2 words." The way a door closes, Darian gathered his copies of every document, stacking them with the same precision he applied to every set of plans he had ever handled. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Simone one final time, not with anger, not with grief, but with the clear and complete attention of a man who has measured everything and is satisfied that his numbers are correct. "You built 4 years on a foundation you never once checked," he said. "I build things that last. That's the difference between us." He walked out of the conference room. He did not look back. The door closed behind him without a sound. 7 months had passed like still water by the time Darian stood on the back deck he had built board by board through the spring, pressure-treated pine, a clean gray stain, level to within 1/8 of an inch, and watched the oak tree take the morning light. It had put out strong new growth this year, lateral branches reaching in both directions the way the good ones did when the roots had finally gone deep enough. The house was his outright now. The settlement had been clean, swift, and expensive for Simone. The forged signature alone had given Patricia the kind of leverage that turned months of anticipated litigation into 6 weeks of quiet negotiation. The $48,000 had been recovered in full with interest as part of the civil judgment. The LC she had fraudulently attached to the vendor contract had cost her an additional sum that Derek Holt was now also partially responsible for. Courtesy of a separate civil action his own former partner had been persuaded to revive. There was a woman named Renee who had started appearing on that back deck on Sunday mornings. She was a civil engineer with a dry sense of humor and a precise habit of asking exactly the right question at exactly the right moment, which was the quality he found most remarkable in a person. She did not perform for anyone. She arrived as herself, in old jeans and good coffee, and she had asked about the oak tree the first time she saw it and listened closely to the whole answer. He had not told her everything yet. He didn't need to. Some things you built slowly on purpose. Word had come through the loose network of mutual acquaintances that Simone had left Charlotte. She was working at a property management company in Greensboro now, mid-level administrative work, a considerable step down from the director role she had held. Derek Holt had lost his real estate license pending review of his involvement in the fraudulent vendor agreement and had relocated quietly to Columbia. Beverly, Simone's mother, had not followed her daughter to Greensboro. She had stayed in Rock Hill. That detail, more than any other, said most of what needed to be said. Darian had heard all of it secondhand from Clarence, who delivered information the same way he delivered everything, without opinion, without ornament, just the facts arranged plainly as facts. Darian had listened, nodded, poured them both a glass of iced tea, and moved on. He pressed his coffee mug between both palms now, and watched the light settle across the yard his grandmother had never seen, but would have understood completely. The tomato plants at the edge of the deck had come in heavy this year, split-skinned and dark red at the shoulders, the way good ones went when you didn't rush them and didn't force them, and simply gave them the right conditions, and then stepped back. He was solvent. He was whole. He was unbothered. Willa May had told him that tools were meant to work, not shine. He had spent 4 years shining the wrong thing. He understood now that the work was the thing, the patient, daily, documented work of building what was worth keeping and knowing, clearly and without bitterness, when to stop building for people who were only ever there for what they could take from it. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. He had never been a man who wasted materials. He took a long sip of his coffee. The morning was quiet and unhurried. The oak tree moved in the early breeze, all of it reaching, none of it giving way. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.